Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another quick album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new-ish Jane Remover record, Census Designated. After making a pretty huge splash within the indie music community at large with 2021's Frailty, it seemed like any follow-up that Jane Remover put out from her debut onwards was going to have a pretty high bar of expectation set for it. But that's not really a total surprise, considering her work on Frailty is still incredibly impressive 2 years later, and while that doesn't really seem like enough time to do a proper retrospective on, because, it's not enough time to do that, it is nonetheless impressive considering it seems like every other month at this point, the experimental electronic-based pop world is putting out new records that continue to innovate and completely blow myself and tons of other people within those circles away. So for Frailty 2 years later to still sound like something that could highly impress people this week is a legitimate achievement all the same, even if the time span hasn't really been that super long. The way that Jane weaved together this experimental electronic pop sound for the internet age in a way that was incredibly gripping immediately upon first listen, while still maintaining these very emotional and at times even existentialist atmospheres throughout Frailty was highly impressive then, and it continues to be highly impressive now when you listen to it in 2023. And as such, Census Designated immediately upon announcement had a very interesting discussion surrounding it, whether it would follow in the footsteps of its predecessor and be more of the same sound and style, or if it would be something wildly different. It's the latter, if you weren't sure. You probably are aware of that if you're watching this review, because this album came out 2 months ago. But alright, look. Census Designated is just as noisy as anything Jane has ever put out through the course of her still young career, but at the same time, it definitely reutilizes that noise for the sake of influences within the realm of shoegaze and post-rock. Definitely genres that I would not have expected from her on this record if it weren't for singles that, again, heavily implied that from the start. But nonetheless, it feels like those sounds and newfound influences are incorporated in a very well executed manner. And this results in a record that is about as dense as one might expect, with a lot of more restrained passages that quickly build up into these huge, massive, monstrous kind of walls of dense sound, and that works very well for tracks like Fling and Lips, though admittedly I do feel it maybe gets to be a bit of an overused trope on cuts like the title track, where it just sort of feels a bit formulaic while also not really taking away from the other strong qualities of the record in terms of her vocals or songwriting. But nonetheless, from a musical standpoint, I feel that a lot of these new influences, they feel fresh for her. They definitely allow Census Designated to feel different from her debut, but at the same time, I feel that they're maybe a bit oversaturated here, though that could also be the effect of shoegaze as a whole being a bit oversaturated within indie music in general right now. That recurring motif of aggressive walls of noise that don't necessarily go towards harsh noise territory, but nonetheless are intentionally chaotic to a massive extent, is something that, again, I feel is a bit overdone at times, but nonetheless, it is certainly something that will be extremely appealing to those that are particularly enamored with that sort of sound, so I guess I can't really comment on it too terribly much, as it definitely works for the record well, and some of the best tracks here are especially defined by their noisy climactic moments. So as a whole, I am slightly underwhelmed by that particular aspect of the creative direction here, yet nonetheless, I think it's done fairly well. What makes Census Designated really stand out as a record, to me at least, however, is Jane's songwriting, which I feel is incredibly powerful here. You have tracks like Holding a Leech that see such self-loathing lyrics delivered as Find You If I Reach for the Stars, Maim Me, I Run But I Can't Go Far, as well as the excellent video closing out with the lines, I almost forgot what I looked like till I felt you moving around inside of me, and through the screen it kills me to know all the lengths I go, do you see me in the video? It's such a striking and self-loathing and world-loathing album that nonetheless, again, feels like it has this sort of moment of clarity from time to time where everything becomes sort of self-aware just for this brief moment of do you see me in the video, almost like Jane is asking herself what she's doing just as she's asking the person she's talking to if they even really notice her in the first place. It's a lot of moments like that throughout this record, moments that don't necessarily feel philosophical per se, but at the same time really do portray this idea of meaninglessness in a variety of contexts relating to identity as well as relationships that I think is done in a manner that never really feels particularly self-loathing in a way that's self-pitying, but more self-loathing in a way that is absolutely honest and incredibly thorough in depicting those sorts of feelings. Census Designated is a record that I think could at least partly be described as being desperate, but I don't necessarily mean that in a negative manner. Actually, far from that. I think that it's a record that comes across as being desperate for clarity above all else, and that clarity is something that just isn't found here. And that heartbreaking realization and honestly cold truth that many of us have a lot of questions relating to a variety of things, such as our place in the world as well as our own identities, is something that is conveyed extremely well here. Again, this isn't my personal favorite album of the year solely because of the fact that instrumentally I'm not particularly blown away by it, but I will say I do think this is one of the best written albums from the year, thus far at least, just because of how well executed the pure honesty is here in terms of the actual content of not really understanding anything and just feeling kind of lost and confused and directionless. I don't think it's really appropriate for me to kind of continue discussing things from this point going forward in terms of lyrical content, but at the same time, yeah, this is probably one of the best penned albums of the year just from a songwriting standpoint alone. Even if the musical content of Census Designated isn't really for you in the same way that it isn't really for me, there's no denying just how striking a lot of this record can be from a lyrical standpoint alone. And you know what, from the actual musical standpoint, it may be a bit unimpressive to you if you were especially caught off guard by the excellency delivered on her debut, but at the same time, if you're going into this record from the perspective of wanting to just see the most raw and unfiltered form of Jane's feelings towards a variety of topics, then there is a lot to dig into here. It's out of this world in regards to just how well written it is. Census Designated may be a record that's a bit impenetrable for people like myself that aren't willing to be fully dedicated to post-rock and heavily ambient-based sounds throughout a record that clocks in at over an hour long when they are very shoegaze-oriented, as that just isn't always my personal style, and it isn't really here, if I'm being totally honest. But I will say that this is undoubtedly one of the most heartfelt records of the entirety of 2023, and I think it's hard to deny it that title in any given way. Her sense of personal songwriting, her working of soundscapes, her open book personality on Census Designated, it all results in something that brews a lot of excitement within myself for future Jane Remover releases, and it also understandably creates something that tons and tons of people keeping an eye on relevant indie music will fall in love with throughout the rest of this year and in the many, many, many years to come as the record slowly grows in age. I think that it's an excellent record, just not really an album that's for me. And to be totally honest, that's part of the reason I didn't cover it in the first place, but I still wanted to talk about this, if not just for the fact that, I don't know, maybe one or two people who really adore this record will find it because of this video. And if you do, then, I mean, I hope that you like it. It's a good record, okay? It's a good album. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.